Good day, everyone, and welcome back to Mondays on Mondays. I'm the CDH Dad, and this is
The
the...
CDH Warrior.
And for those of you that may not have seen this previously or just don't know any of the details, we do this. Our last name is actually Monday, so that's the reason we do the Mondays on Mondays. My son has put this together as a way to kind of provide a forum to discuss issues for families that deal with special needs children, particularly those that have some serious medical health issues. Part of our input into this is that we've spent 3 decades almost dealing with children with special medical needs. Just to give you a little bit of the background, my son was a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, undiagnosed prior to birth. So it was a major shock for us, my wife and I, to deal with this. And we had to go through those forums, and that's going to be part of our discussion, is how do you deal with that sudden impact and the personal concerns dealing with the child with the health issues. And then in our case, we had a daughter 2 years following that. My son went through a number of surgeries, over a dozen surgeries for various corrective needs, but has survived well and does well. But then when my daughter was born, we were concerned that we might have a second CDH, or a second medical issue to deal with, which we did not at that point at birth, but prior to her second birthday, she was diagnosed with aplastic anemia and required a bone marrow transplant. So, as I said, from a family standpoint, we have dealt with this impact from different aspects, different conditions, totally unrelated, and had to go through the stresses, strains, and development of how to live with that and how to function as a normal family, or as normal as we could be. Yeah. So that's part of the reason that we have this forum, is just to be able to discuss those issues and present some of our experience to families that may be going through that now, just so that you can have some understanding that there may be light at the end of the tunnel. There are possibilities, and very good possibilities, of surviving and doing well long term. Both of my children are both healthy and functioning reasonably well. So that's the reason we want to do this. The disclaimer that I want to put in is that neither of us are medical professionals. We don't have backgrounds in medicine, nursing, therapy, psychology, sociology. I'm actually an engineer by trade and have worked in industry for many years. My wife was a horticulturalist. We lost her about 3 years ago, but it was a long journey for us as a family. And as we say, that's part of the reason we want to do this. So welcome back once again, and we'll catch into the topic in just a moment.
Let's roll the title.
Welcome back again, everyone. As I've kind of discussed in some of the points in the past, what we do is we deal with a lot of the social media discussions and items there. We kind of pick some of the topics that we deal with from those. It's also one, I know my son has set up a email account, so if you have any particular questions or comments, suggestions, those can be sent there, and we can respond to those. But go ahead.
That address is mondaysonmonday4@gmail.com. The Mondays on Monday, the number 4@gmail.com.
Okay, and it will be shown on the screen, so you can see that. But one of the things that came up this last week in a discussion, and I know that it was one that my wife and I went through, is parents' guilt if you have a child that has a severe medical condition at birth is, okay, you have a natural affinity to feel responsible. It was something that I did, something that was involved. And as I've mentioned, I'm an engineer by training, mainly in the chemical industry. So you go through a lot of the concerns is, okay, is it something I've been exposed to? Was it something that I had on my clothes or exposed my wife to during pregnancy or exposed my child to, in the case of my daughter with the aplastic anemia, that could have caused this issue and could have caused their health problems? My wife, I know, went through a lot of soul searching because, as I said, we knew nothing about my son's condition until right at childbirth. And when she was in labor, the doctor realized that something was not right, and we ended up doing a cesarean, and at birth realized that it was the congenital diaphragmatic hernia, basically his organs were up in his chest. And that was causing some of the issues that we were concerned, causing respiratory and cardiac issues during the birth process. But my wife, I know, went through a lot of questioning. Is that, okay, was it something that she had done during the pregnancy, something that may have impacted and caused this issue? Yeah. And with CDH, in most cases, there are some cases where it is tied to part of other defects.
Yeah.
And it is genetic, so it does come into play there. But in most cases, CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, is not idiopathic. It is not necessarily tied to a genetic reason, and the reasons for that, are still being researched. But it's also one, if you consider the human body, there's a lot of parts and a lot of things that have to develop over time. And that little flap, that's the diaphragm between the abdomen and the chest, it's very easy for it to have just a small deformation in it, and that can lead to longer term issues. And part of what we found is that people that didn't realize that they had it until several years later, and realized that they might have had a problem with that. But part of the thing is, as a parent, in most cases, it is not something that is known to be a genetic problem. A lot of the childbirths are not necessarily known to be genetic or related to lifestyle choices or anything that had to play there. There are some things in terms of using drugs or having some illnesses, things like that could impact your child's birth experience in the child at birth. But in most cases, it's not. I come from a generation when we started going through the fact of alcohol, smoking, drug use, some of the other things that could come into play that could impact your child's development and their birth experience and the health issues that they had. Most of those have been identified and dealt with, but excuse me, I'm going to have a sneeze here. Excuse me. But as we discussed, most of that is not anything that you can actually control, but it's a natural response to feel that you have responsibility for your child. It's part of that nurturing parenting aspect that you have this personal tie-in to, anything with that child is my responsibility.
I wanted to bring up that a lot of things that we're now discovering, thanks to the Human Genome Project, a lot of these issues have a genetic basis that most people don't see, or they're so rare and random. They're like 1 in 4 million, 1 in 4,000 1 in 10,000, 1 in 80,000, 1 in 100,000. There's no exact explanation. And
Right.
I grew up, when I was first in school, they were just finishing the Human Genome Project. I started college back in 2013. Through some personal health issues and some family issues, I left school and then have come back. But I was in school when they just finished the Human Genome Project and started to understand all of the genetics with all this.
Right, and that has been helpful because we can identify a lot of those things. But it's also one, and part of the reason we wanted to kind of bring this up in this group is that, there's some that are birth defects, like my daughter's case was a factor of aplastic anemia, is generally, in most cases, related to exposure to some type of chemical or something like that can impact the body's blood system and the bone marrow. And that was one that we went through a lot of evaluations, and we worked with the hospital and the medical staff there and the social staff trying to go through, was there anything that would have potentially caused my daughter's illness, because it was a very severe form of aplastic anemia. In typical cases, someone will get a exposure generally to a pesticide or some hazardous chemical, and it will impact their bone marrow and that system. But not to a point that it fully negates the bone marrow.
Yeah.
And then the body is able to, particularly with medical help, recover over a period of time. In my daughter's case, it was one that in February we noticed some bruising. We started asking some questions. Within 2 weeks, her condition had severely worsened. We had a doctor who happened to live right next to us who was a pediatrician by trade, but was actually with the Department of Health at the University of Georgia, or at the state of Georgia. And she was able to diagnose and go through this and determine that it was aplastic anemia. But going through the details of this, as I said, it was determined on a Sunday morning, and really by that following week, fully diagnosed, and the extent was determined that she had no bone marrow whatsoever in her system, which means that there was nothing to recover. So no matter what the treatment, we couldn't bring that back. So the only choice of help was having a bone marrow transplant.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate to be able to find a family that had donated a umbilical cord, and it was a close enough match that we were able to have that brought in and use that as the donor for her bone marrow.
5 out of 6?
It was 5 out of 6 HLA matching.
Now, I want to also bring this up because most people don't realize this. This was at a time when stem cell research was its infancy. I mean, literally, there were still folks actively fighting against stem cell research, that it was going to start destroying people.
Right, and part of the thing that had been found with bone marrow transplant, because for a couple of decades, bone marrow transplants had been utilized, but it had been a process of actually harvesting the bone marrow itself, separating out the cells, and then putting that back into
the recipient.
The recipient. And it wasn't until really in the late 1980s, 1990s that it was actually determined that the bone marrow was not really what was engrafting into the system, but it was the stem cells that were in the bone marrow that basically provided that transplant. So then they switched to, rather than having to go in and do a bone marrow harvest, which was very painful, usually having to go in with a large needle into the hip bone and try and pull enough bone marrow to be utilized, is they were able to actually do a blood transfusion similar to if you're donating blood at the blood bank, and harvest and separate out the stem cells and then use those to go back into the body and go into the recipient.
If I'm correct, at that time it was a similar process to how they separate out platelets.
Right. It's
that basically you separate out the entire blood system. The entire vial of blood gets separated into its different components.
Right.
Using a centrifuge.
Right. But it was actually very much a emotional letdown when we went through this, because in my daughter's case it was one of, you're having to go through the very extensive process of destroying the body's immune system and the body's blood system so that it can accept that donated stem cells, bone marrow. So it's a matter of several days of very heavy chemotherapy. And if anyone has been involved in chemotherapy, you know, typically you would do one dose and then wait a few weeks or a week or longer, do another dose, and it kind of rotates through over time. In the case of what my daughter went through, it was over a week, and it was every day going through the chemotherapy, and it was very excruciating and very painful for her. She was at a point, she was non-talkative, so we really couldn't know exactly what she was going through, but we knew that she was going through hell trying to do this. And then going through a couple of rounds of total body irradiation in one day. So it's very dramatic, very intensive getting to that point. And then we get to the point of having the donation, and when they infused the stem cells, it was a little 60 cc vial of cells that they put into an IV. So, as I said, it was kind of this very dramatic build up to that point, and then suddenly kind of like a letdown when you see, oh, we did all that for just this little bitty vial, but it's a very valuable vial in her life.
Yeah.
She did have complications from that and issues that we had to deal with, not necessarily from the engraftment, but prior to the engraftment of those stem cells, she developed a fusarium, which was a fungal infection. And since her body had no immune system, it was very devastating. We were fortunate that we had a doctor who was able to utilize some techniques that weren't readily known and utilized. And we were able to provide, basically my wife and I went through transfusions for white blood cells so that we could provide her with an immune system from our immune system to help fight normal issues while her body dealt with that fungal infection and dealt with the engraftment of the stem cells.
You all were apheresed for white blood cells.
Right. And it's a very extensive process. So, this is one where we're just trying to give some contact and some context that, as parents, you're going to go through a lot of soul searching. You're going to go through a lot of blaming yourself for what happened. I know with my daughter and the aplastic anemia, I dealt with chemicals that one of the side effects of exposure to those chemicals could be aplastic anemia and other types of health issues, issues related to kidneys and the liver and other bodily organs that these things could impact. But it was determined that that was not what caused her issue. Most likely, and I'm seeing more cases of this now because it's a little better identified. When my daughter went through this, it was very rare for a child to have this, or it was very rarely diagnosed as being the issue. But what we highly suspect is that she ended up with just a typical childhood virus, and then a rotavirus type infection, and it escalated into an infection that impacted her bone marrow system. We'll never know the full details, but that's the best possibility of what could have happened. So there was nothing that we could have done about it. But in the impact of us as a family, yes, there's a lot of soul searching and a lot of questioning, particularly when you have two children that are totally unrelated health issues that we had to deal with. So that was part of the reason we wanted to bring that up. I know that was a discussion that had been going along on one of the social media boards, and I just wanted to explain that you have to be at a point where you kind of back away from taking personal responsibility for causing that problem and switch to the focus that your responsibility as a parent is to help the doctors and help your child to do whatever is best to help your child survive and get better. So that's the focus that we have. So with that being said, thank you very much for joining us again for Mondays on Mondays, and have a great week.
Have a great day. See you next week.